There's a saying, water always finds a leak. Now, the reason should be obvious. As one writer put it, water is relentless. It will find any path to escape, even if it's hidden behind walls, under floors, or in the most unlikely places. My point is, the true nature of things eventually reveal themselves, whether it's hidden motives, stored emotions, or it's truths being kept hidden. The intensity and reality of them will find a way to escape and make themselves known. I want us to examine the exposing of some hidden aspects of false teachers today on Truth Matters. Today, truth is denied, ignored, and resisted with open hostility. Yet in life and in times of crisis, we discover that truth matters. One of the resilient aspects of God's truth is its relentless ability to bring to light its glorious truths and at the same time expose that which contradicts it. We have looked at what is false in terms of false teaching, and now we're examining false teachers. Of course, by pointing them out as false, the Bible brings to light the content of their falsehoods. But the Bible also brings to light the ungodly character of those spreading the false teaching. Christ came into the world as the light to the world. And as it says in John 1, 4, and 5, in him is life, and that life was the light of mankind. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not grasp it. Later, when Jesus spoke to the religious leader Nicodemus in John 3:19, he said, "And this is the judgment, that light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light, for their deeds were evil." There's an aversion of the darkness to light. It has a revealing property that those who walk in darkness, they seek to avoid. Darkness and light stand in total contrast to each other. Now, the reason I mention all this is that part of the focus of today's topic is what we're going to be looking at. And in this short book, God is revealing what the enemy would better want remain hidden. The false teachers that Jude mentions are individuals who have crept into the fellowship unnoticed. The enemy seeks to secretly infiltrate workers into the fellowship of believers. They get in unnoticed, and they seek to keep their intentions unnoticed. All the while, these false teachers work to undermine the truth and work of God within the church. This is the purpose of God's provision in this book of Jude and other truths within the Scriptures. Today we will look at just one verse, and that is verse 16. It says this, "These are grumblers, finding fault, following after their own lust. They speak arrogantly, flattering people for the sake of gaining an advantage." The verse here refers to these people. This verse is a continuation of the previous verse, and it defines who he's talking about. He's referring to all those who will stand in the judgment at the coming of the Lord. And even more specifically, he's talking about and referring to false teachers and false prophets, which is the subject of this whole book. Now, he had addressed the character earlier and is now elaborating more about their nature here. Now, in the introduction, I used the illustration of the water always finding a place where it can leak out. The purpose, of course, is to illustrate the ability of water to find a place where the integrity of its container is compromised. Water will find the leak. And in the same way, the true character of false teachers will be exposed. For instance, the religious group known as the Pharisees, well, they paraded themselves as followers of God of the highest order. They followed all of the perceived outward rules and regulations of God. But Jesus was not fooled. He saw them for what they were. In Luke 12, 1a through 3, Jesus said this, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. But there is nothing covered up that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. Accordingly, whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you have whispered in the inner rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops." In the context of that statement, Jesus is actually speaking to both those concerning the Pharisees and the disciples themselves. You see, for the Pharisees, their hypocrisy, Jesus said, would be exposed. And for the disciples, the Pharisees and everyone like them would not be able to hold back the truth of God. Now, back to Jude. As I mentioned in the verse, he continues to describe the false teachers who have crept into the congregation of believers. In this verse, Jude will speak to them in terms of their actions and tactics. He begins by pointing out that and calling them grumblers. Now, when you hear that word, someone you know and have met probably comes to mind. Grumblers have a distinct character. Their words are, there are words that when you say them, they sound just like the meaning. The name for that, of course, is onomatopoeia. It's a big word, but these are words like buzz, hiss, tweet, and pop. Well, in the Greek language, the word that's translated grumble is the word gogudzo. It's the kind of word where your face kind of distorts itself to say gogudzo. The word means speaking in an undertone, mumbling, and under your breath. The context of the word helps define what they're mumbling about and the accompanying attitude connected with their mumbling. The word is used for instance, in 1 Corinthians 10, 9 through 11, speaking of as an illustration of those who resisted God and the leadership of Moses. It says, "Now let us not try the Lord as some did and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble as some of them did and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon whom the end of the ages have come." These grumblers grumbled to the Lord about what he was doing and about Moses, their leader. And their grumbling undermined the work of God. And because of their grumbling resistance, they were destroyed. Well, Jude leaves nothing to the imagination as to the meaning concerning the ones he's talking about. Their grumbling wasn't from honest inquiry or questioning. Jude says that their grumbling comes from their action of finding fault. These are persons who murmur complaints. They are persons who grumble in constant discontent and dissatisfaction. They are like a constant dripping water of complaint. The outcome of such individuals on the unity of the fellowship? Well, believers are not edified in this. And in fact, it's toxic and corrosive. As it says in the previous verse, they are godless. The grumbling and complaining is an expression of that godlessness. And it is their grumbling and complaining which keep them in that state of discontent. They are totally the opposite of what we see in 1 Timothy 6, 5 and 6, where it says, "And constant friction between men and of depraved mind and deprived of the truth, who suppose that godliness is a means of great gain, but godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment." These complaining grumblers may act and sound like they have legitimate grievances, but in fact, they are selfish, arrogant, and self-serving. In their grumbling, they are following their own lust. For them, it's all about what they want, what they desire. Their life is about satisfying themselves. This is autonomy in full display. For them, it's about me. And no wonder they're grumbling. No wonder they're always complaining and never satisfied. Peter speaks of this small group in 2 Peter 2:10a, saying, "And especially those who indulge the flesh and in its corrupt desires and despise authority, daring, self-willed, they do not tremble when they revile angelic majesties." Self-centeredness has no place in the Christian faith. It affects the fellowship of believers, and it puts the agenda of the one up against the fellowship and its health. An illustration of this is in 3 John 1, 9 through 10. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. For this reason, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does, unjustly accusing us with wicked words, and not satisfied with that, he himself does not receive the brethren either, and forbids those who desire to do so, and puts them out of the church. Here's a toxic individual who's made his way into the church, and his own agenda is preeminent in consideration. He defies God's ordained authority, and he attacks anyone who opposes him. It's so blatant that John points him out by name. This example fits exactly what Jude describes in the tactic of these people. He says they speak arrogantly. The New King James Version says it, and their mouth great swelling words come out. One writer put it, they pompously put themselves up with an elaborate, sophisticated religious vocabulary that had an external spiritual tone and attractiveness, but was void of divine truth and substance. Remembering that the immediate context of this verse is divine judgment only makes it more apparent that God is not fooled by their outward pretenses. He sees the hearts of these false teachers, and he points it out for the church. And likewise, we can now see it. Jude concludes this verse by describing their tactic of flattering people for the sake of gaining an advantage. Their expressed selfish attitude toward in their deceptive tactic is that of flattery. They are manipulators. They have a selfish motive and use flattery to get what they want. Of course, the tempting carrot in this process is to give people what they want. It's a circle of selfishness that feeds selfishness. Speaking God's truth is not foremost in their minds or their mouths. This is not something new with the enemy. Speaking of such people, Psalms 5:5 says, "The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all who do iniquity." Psalms continues in the description of this in verse 9. There is nothing reliable in what they say. Their inward part is destruction. Their throat is is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue. Or as the Proverbs warns in Romans 29:5, a man who flatters his neighbor is spreading a net for his steps. It's a trap they're setting. What's even worse is when the people who profess the faith become accomplices in this mutual game of flattery. 2 Timothy 4 verses 3 and 4 speaks of this, saying, "For a time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance with their own desires, and will turn ears away from the truth and be turned aside to myths." In all of this comes an acknowledgement and a warning. The acknowledgement is that this type of person does in fact exist within the fellowship of believers. It was that way in the early days of the church, and it is that way today. It's not a matter of opinion or doctrinal differences that he's talking about. It's an acknowledgement and a recognition of what God has exposed in his word. It's not unkind to point this out. The health of the fellowship is at stake. This is part of contending for the faith. And what does the word from Jude tell us? Well, it speaks to us today that there are obvious false teachers who have crept into the fellowship of believers. 3 applications immediately come to mind. First, we should point out and avoid grumblers and complainers. If you come across those within the fellowship who somehow seem to practice the act of constantly murmuring and complaining, speak to it. Don't be a silent bystander. Our faith tells us in Philippians 4:5, let your gentle spirit be known to all men. The Lord is near. Memorize that. Quote it to them. Contend for the faith. Secondly, this word from Jude points out to the fact that we should point out and avoid the arrogant. Pride is not a virtue in our faith. It does not please God. In fact, you should memorize and quote James 4:6. He gives more grace. Therefore it says, God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Always also remember that whenever we dispense the truth, we do so in love. But we must not be silent concerning the truth in the fellowship. We are to contend for the faith. And thirdly, this word from Jude points out how we should call attention and avoid flattery. Flattery is a tool of manipulation and harmful to the most vulnerable. Romans 16, 17, and 18 makes this very clear. He says, "Now I urge you, brethren, keep your eyes on those who cause dissension and hindrances contrary to the teaching which you've learned, and turn away from them. For such men are slaves, not to our Lord Jesus, but to their own appetites. And by their smooth and flattering words, they have deceived the hearts of the unsuspecting." The faith that we contend for is one which God Himself has given us. It is godly and very different from the godless lives of the false. Our contending for the faith is a spiritual struggle manifested in those whose intentions are not godly. They will leak their godless nature. This is why we should know the truth. It is in knowing the truth that we can spot those with godless intention. And it is for the fellowship of the faithful and for the glory of God that we walk and live in the truth. And that's because truth matters. Thanks for watching and listening to Truth Matters. Please like, share, and subscribe to Truth Matters. It truly helps to spread and keep us going. We'll catch you next time.